So I'm going to go over this week's interesting articles I found that I think are relevant to digital health. So I'm going to talk about them and welcome your thoughts and see what you think about them. Okay, so first we're going to talk about is from Moby Health. And this was recent news from Otsuka, who are apparently teaming up with Click Therapeutics. So what is this? So if you follow Otsuka, you know that they've been kind of big game changers in the digital health space recently. What with them teaming up with Proteus Digital Health to make the first bioadjustable sensor broadly brought to the market with their FDA-approved product, Abilify MySight. And I guess it comes as no surprise that Otsuka is now looking beyond that. I would say it's very similar at this current time to what Novartis is doing with paratherapeutics. So in this case, we see Otsuka now teaming up with Click Therapeutics. So what is this? Well, they said they invested $300 million into this product, and I would say read this article, see what they're currently interested in particular. But, I thought it might be worth more time spending about talking about Click Therapeutics. If you look at them, they really remind me of Pear. Because, they're making standalone software that could be prescribed for treatment. And if we look at their pipeline, we can see what they're currently interested in. So right now, they Clicatine out. This is for smoking cessation. They do have a small pilot study released going over its intervention. And then we can also see that they're also interested in ACS, chronic pain, insomnia, and major depressive disorder. Looking at this, it's very similar to Pear Therapeutics' pipeline as well. So this is quite fascinating. Now we know Pear Therapeutics has some of the first two FDA-approved products out there. But Click may be, I'd say, probably a big competition, and I'm kind of curious what other products are going to be coming out to the market from these types of companies. At the current time, these are only two I really know of well. So if you guys know of anyone else that's kind of doing this, I would love to know. Feel free to just comment or just send me some information. Looking at their current research on this is on my list of things I want to kind of dive into and just see what is the type of research going into this, how it's compared to what Pear is doing. What is the methodology? What is the outcomes that they're really looking at? Is this just feasibility studies, or are these actually clinical efficacy studies? And one thing I saw in here was they had this little cool calculator about what is a digital therapeutic. Now, you've probably heard me in the past talk about the Digital Therapeutic Alliance kind of putting out their white paper, which I really highly advocate you read. Another one would be the Digital Therapeutic paper from Health Excel. So how does Click define this stuff? So is a product comprised of software? Yes. Is a product designed to effectively treat a disease? Yes. Is a product comprised of software only? Now this is interesting because this is kind of almost the dividing line here, because you can see a lot of hardware products such as maybe a standalone device that you might wear on your wrist isn't a digital therapeutic. If it's like a calorie counter, if it's a step counter, that may be a big just divide there. But if it's adjunctive, then I think that's fine. So let's see. So is the product comprised of software only? And you can see yes. And then if we were to go back, restart that. So software, treat a disease, no. Let's say there's hardware in there. This software component of the product, the primary mechanism action for treating disease. Let's say no, though. Could the software be a component? And let's say yes. And then if we go through that, and then it will be digital therapeutic. So I think it's rather interesting to put this thing out there because there's a lot of confusion, I think, about digital therapeutics. So this is a really cool checklist that someone devised. Next article. This, I think, is always a good reminder, and I think this goes for any company out there that's really getting into the healthcare field, is if we want to think about it, it's kind of like health literacy is something I think a lot of people gloss over a lot. And even if we're talking about, digital health being a behavioral science, is it a true medical science? At the end of the day, things like this that have been around forever still are really, really important. So talking about health literacy is really key. So this article is from the New York Times, and it really goes into detail just about people understanding their medications and just information out there. And, in pharmacy school, we try teaching students a lot. Like, is this a medication you take twice a day? Is this a medication you take every 12 hours? Is this something you take every 8 hours? Is this a medication you take 3 times a day? Just that SIG, or the information provided for a patient, can really change a lot in terms of how a patient may address their adherence to that therapy. And that's something that I think early on for a lot of students, they don't really understand. And I'm talking for healthcare professionals just early on in their education. And then when they start seeing patients get flustered and asking us the questions like, well, how should I take this? When should I take it? What should I take it with and such? You start realizing even if you throw out all this information, it's just a lot for people to navigate and get through. And I think there's a missing link here in terms of how do we produce better patient information in an era where we're just talking about, improving healthcare through technology. Health literacy, I think, is one area that could be really tackled pretty well, and I don't think anyone's really done it widespread very well. And I've been involved with some companies trying to do that. I've talked to a lot of people that are trying to do it, but I think anything that's gotten really mainstream hasn't really reached that point yet, unfortunately. Another little bit of news would be with Alto Pharmacy. This is from Digital Pharmacist, but you can find it anywhere other media. The fact that they raised $50 million. Now RX also raised a couple $1 million, so this area is becoming very competitive in terms of these pharmacy companies. I think there's a lot of money being thrown in them just because PillPack made it so big. So I think a lot of investors are just saying, well, PillPack can make it this big, there must be room for these others to also get out there. And I think I think it's a good shakeup for pharmacy at the end of the day. It makes us look and say, if we've been doing things this long, and a lot of people are saying maybe we're doing it wrong and it's not right, then maybe it's a good room for us to grow and adapt. And going along with that is Walgreens is going to try changing costs for medications and just access, working with Alphabet's Verily, I should say. And along with that is also the fact that this thing loads. Well, it was basically the fact that Verily raised another $1 billion for new software and hardware coming out. So that, I think this is a kind of cool article. I mean, Verily just also announced that they were not going to go down their path with their diabetes sensor that fits on the eye or contact lens. I think that was a big kick because it was something that a lot of people knew them for. And now Verily really has to shine and say, look, we're doing more than just that. We have all these other projects going on with either Novartis, Dexcom, what have you. And I think they really need to kind of come out there and make that shine. Next is, I thought this was kind of cool, Medtronic and IBM Watson are teaming with Sugar IQ, and it's to use AI technology to better predict hypoglycemia events. And, if we talk about diabetes management and we talk about therapy, we recognize that one of the largest reasons for adverse drug reactions and hospitalizations is either anticoagulation therapy or hypoglycemia associated with the use of like insulin products and other really drugs that drop blood sugar pretty quickly, especially in the elderly patients. So this is really cool because I really am a big believer in CGM technology. Whether we talk about Freestyle Libre, what Dexcom is doing and such, and all these other CGM technologies coming out, is the fact that we can predict hypoglycemia. Could we realistically see a drop in admissions because of that? And I think if we saw that, I think a lot of payers would be saying, put almost all these patients on there. If they've ever had an event, if they've ever had situations where they were admitted just for hypoglycemia, and we have a realistic reason why, maybe this is a cutoff after 2 or 3, you should go on this intervention just to stop it. And that is something I'm kind of really fascinated might come to play here soon. Next, this is interesting because I get asked this a lot, is when will we see widespread kiosk use of medications out there? And there's one company that is with Walgreens called MedAvail. I think it's coming out of pilot phase now. And now there's this one company called Script Center. This one made some news in New York just because there were some concerns about legal and board overview and such. But if I decided to do a little bit more look into it, and it's basically just a automatic pill kiosk. So if you look at the video, you can see there's a pharmacist here remotely. And what happens, you take the prescription up, gets verified. If the medication's in the machine, it dispenses, and the pharmacist can provide counseling as needed, and it handles all the payments and such. Why do I think kiosks have not taken off? Well, for pharmacists out there, we already know it's a new year. And favorite question is, do you have your new insurance card? And people say, yes, I do. Or no, I don't. Or my insurance hasn't changed. And at the end of the day, a lot of people don't want to automate this process. Heck, a lot of the time pharmacies deal in the community setting with billing problems. And I think if hypothetically, if the United States healthcare system worked magically and we were fine, and then we didn't have all these issues with insurance and cash prices and insurance prices and what have you, sure, kiosks would be great. But the fact about it, at the end of the day, it doesn't really work very well. We still need that human element just to navigate it. You see other companies out there that come out like ZapRx and things like that that just help patients out with the whole PA process or cover my meds and what they do. And, you reach that point where you start saying these companies have a niche just because it's so complicated. And, these kiosks, I think, hypothetically, maybe a nationalized health system would work way better. In the United States, I think it's just a very difficult area. Then you have local, regional, or I should say state-based pharmacy boards and their own laws and what applies and whatever work goes into that. And these script centers suddenly have so much more to navigate. So, will these things take off? I think possibly. They do have their own limitations in terms of what they can store and such. Because, if it's a liquid, you're probably not going to be able to get compounded. So if you have a kid that has like an ear infection like mine just did, I have to go to the pharmacy just so it gets mixed up. None of these script centers or these kiosks I know will mix liquid antibiotics is one example. Another issue may be controlled substances. What can they hold? So things like that is what I really consider with them. Now, this one actually I thought was pretty cool. So I love this topic of digital biomarkers and using digital health to start tracking different avenues for different measurements of health. So, you have your vitals and objective measurements, but now digital also offers us other means of collecting health information in an ambulatory setting and in a real world that we never in the past been able to access. So Novartis has teamed up with the company basically for studies at GATE. And I mean, this has applications I can imagine in multiple things, whether it be Parkinson's, maybe MS, maybe some other neurological diseases. We've seen this also with, I think in a previous talk I had was about socks for diabetics, for patients to monitor their feet to make sure they're not losing sensation or temperature control or at risk for infections. So this stuff is really cool because, I mean, this foot-based technology and the sensors, it's just going everywhere. And along with that was a document from HIMSS that came out in December. I missed this one, but it's an interesting talk about using wearable tech for chronic care management. And I think what I like better, though, is this document from HIMSS. It just gives a little white paper about what is the benefits and what to consider and what do patients want. I mean, maybe it's a little bit higher in terms of over expectations just based on sample size, but at the end of the day, I still think it's on the right path. I think this is still very accurate. Now, some publications I do want to talk about and just mention here. So one is from the Lancet. This is really cool. I've been seeing some of these come out, and and the question becomes, what evidence do we need to say that digital health intervention is key? And I struggle with this because I remember the work I did when I even started getting into all stuff with mobile health back in 2011, 2012 with iMedical apps. It's just, what level of evidence do you need for an app to show that it has some level of clinical efficacy? And that's really matured now with the digital therapeutics market, which I never even expected all that stuff to come out like this. And I think the question in different forms has always been, what level of evidence do you need? Do you need an RCT? Do you need, can you just base it off real world evidence? Could you just base it off a small clinical feasibility study? Like, at what point do you need evidence to say something actually truly works and leads to an outcome? So I would say if you're a company interested in this stuff, I think this is a good read. And It's something that I've only read a little bit. I want to like dive into more. And then you also have this new technical framework that just came out from NHS along the same kind of level, just talking about standards that are needed. So I think we're getting to this point where there's going to be a lot of questions. The FDA seems to be going one direction. I'm seeing some other work that seems to be going another direction. I'm curious if we'll see a unified approach about digital health in terms of what evidence is needed. Because at the end of the day, one thing to consider is the fact that whatever's done in Europe and Asia and the United States, if it's such a fragmented approach, I feel like this is really going to slow down development extremely hard, especially when we consider just the implications for pharma trying to get a product approved in one country versus another. Biosimilars, if anyone's familiar with that whole hubbub, that's a great example I could offer at this current time, just with the United States trying to get the generic market and all the different rules and regulations along that. This was kind of cool. So this was an article about how a child was immunized by the world's first drone-delivered vaccine. I don't know if it's too true. I thought this stuff had already been done, but I've seen more and more news and media about drone-based deliveries. There was one company I know that's based, I believe, in Texas, and they were using like this smart little thermos that could carry drugs, and that was being used in Puerto Rico after the hurricane went through, and that was used to deliver medications. But drone-based delivery has been around for a while now. I think I remember talking about it almost 4 or 5 years ago, in one of the first few podcasts I even covered, and I think it's a lot of hype. Applicability, I think it's there definitely from a public health standpoint. I think there's definitely huge use of this type of services, especially for disaster-based relief. And is that too small of a niche market, though, to really make a business? I think it's a huge question at the end of the day. Next one is development of entirely remote, non-physician-led hypertension management program. And I want to say this one was actually referred to me by a colleague, David Berkowitz. So if you're not familiar with him, he's over at Newton Wellesley Hospital outside Boston. He's great in digital health, I would say, especially from an analytics and artificial intelligence side. He's really passionate about there. I'm more passionate about the digital therapeutics and mobile space probably. So between the two of us, we have really great conversations. And he referred this to me because we were actually talking about, where does pharmacists fall in terms of all these things? And this is a pharmacist-based program, basically using remote patient monitoring for basically control of blood pressure. And there's tons of these coming out. And I really want to believe that pharmacists will be able to eventually bill for RPM or remote patient monitoring, and that will be able to provide clinical services, just even a community using this technology. These types of studies, I think, are really key. And my biggest critique is I would just like to say, get rid of this non-physician led and just come out and say who's doing it at the end of the day. I think that's probably one of the biggest limitations. Even looking at the AMA playbook, it cites primarily a study doing collaborative practice with the pharmacist and doesn't even mention pharmacists in the document. That's a big gripe of mine. I think that's where we're really getting kicked at the end of the day. And last thing was a viewpoint published in JAMA recently. Social determinants of health in the digital age. And there's always the talks about social determinants for health, and the use of social media, I think, has been around for a long time, that talk. This kind of just went to a viewpoint about it, but I think it put it together pretty well. So I would say it's probably worth a read if you're really curious about that type of stuff. In any event, okay, so these are the types of articles I found this past week and been glossing over. Some of them will probably dive deeper than others, but just thought I'd share it with you. And this is my digital health roundup for this week. Take care and have a good day.